Well, let's spend the next few minutes focused on Ukraine. Its military says it's now launched a southern offensive against Russian forces in an attempt to reverse some of Russia's biggest territorial gains. The operation's particularly aimed at retaking the city of Kherson. Ukraine claims separatist fighters in the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic have retreated from their positions and that Russian troops who are supporting them have fled. First of all, from Kiev, here's my colleague Hugo Bachega.
For weeks, we've been talking about the Ukrainians trying to launch this major offensive to retake Kherson in the south, and we could be seeing the beginning of it. We had reports that there is intense fighting in parts of the south of the country. As you said, it seems that Ukrainian forces managed to break through the first line of Russian defense around the city. There are reports that electricity has been cut off. And for weeks, the Ukrainians have been targeting and attacking Russian positions, supply lines deep inside Russian-controlled territory, away from the front lines, using those sophisticated weapons supplied by the West. Now, obviously, Kherson is a city that's been under Russian occupation since the very beginning of the war. It is one of the largest Ukrainian cities under Russian control. But for quite some time, we've been talking about how this conflict seemed to be at a deadlock with no changes in terms of military positions, a lot of activity in the east, in particular around the city of Kharkiv, also in the regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, and also in the south. So we could be seeing perhaps the beginning of a change in terms of the military situation on the ground.
Well, keeping our focus on southern Ukraine, a team of international inspectors from the UN's nuclear watchdog is on its way to the Zaporizhzhia power plant. Now, Russia currently controls it, but Ukrainian staff operate it. And as you can imagine, there are security concerns. 14 members of the IAEA have left Vienna. Here they are. They'll arrive at the plant this week and they'll assess the damage at the site, they'll evaluate the conditions for the staff, and they'll perform what they call urgent safeguard activities. Now, the mission's taken weeks to negotiate. Ukraine's warning that the visit remains dangerous.
But without an exaggeration, this mission will be the hardest in the history of IAEA, given the active combat activities undertaken by the Russian Federation on the ground, and also the very blatant way that Russia is trying to legitimize its presence at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We expect from the mission a clear statement of facts of violation of all nuclear safety protocols. We know that Russia is putting not only Ukraine but also the entire world at threat, at risk of a nuclear accident.
Now, this plant sits on the southern bank of the Dnieper River, 200 kilometers away from Crimea, which Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014. The plant was a strategic prize for Russia and it was seized in March in the first weeks of the war. Ukraine says Russia is using it as a military base with troops and heavy machinery based there, and there is some evidence of that. The Guardian posted this image last week of Russian tanks inside a facility close to two operational reactors. And inside the facility, remember, are around 9,000 Ukrainian workers who are still running the plant. Meanwhile, the site's come under frequent fire. This is the aftermath of shelling last week, with both sides blaming each other. Russia now says the UN nuclear team will have to travel through Ukrainian-held territory to get to the plant, but when it does, Russia says it will guarantee their security. Here's the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov.
Look, pressure on Ukraine can help to stop shelling at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant and adjacent territories. Russia is interested in this IAEA mission and took part in its preparations. We are open for cooperation and engagement. The possibility of further actions will be discussed on the spot. Everything will depend on details.
Now, there are 6 nuclear reactors at Zaporizhzhia, which before the war produced a fifth of Ukraine's electricity. Right now, only 2 of the reactors currently provide power to Ukraine. Shelling, we know, has already damaged a dry storage facility, which was used for nuclear fuel to be kept. But there are other concerns too. Last week, a fire damaged overhead power lines, cutting the plant off from Ukraine's electricity grid for the first time in its history. Backup generators then kicked in to supply the power. If the nuclear reactors did lose power supply, the pumps cooling the hot reactor core would stop working, which could lead to the fuel starting to melt. Well, the IAEA says its assessment of the site is urgent. Here's its director, Rafael Grossi, speaking last week.
Now there is general recognition that we need to be there. We need to be there soon. Kyiv accepts it. Moscow accepts it.
Well, there have been multiple warnings that an accident at the plant could be a catastrophe. People, of course, remember Chernobyl, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster in 1986. Emergency workers are preparing for a possible nuclear leak. At this training session, workers are learning how to manage the risk of nuclear accidents and how to deactivate radiation dust. Here's another way they're preparing, by handing out iodine tablets to residents within 50 kilometres of the plant. Potassium iodine can block a type of radioactive material. But a nuclear accident could spread radiation far further afield and, of course, into Europe and potentially into Russia. Here's the French President, Emmanuel Macron.
Nuclear safety and security cannot be undermined by this war, and so this mission is important. It must protect this plant and the safety and security of the whole region. The second concern is that Ukrainian sovereignty over this plant must not be challenged. Nuclear power should not be an object of war, and it is important also to defend Ukrainian sovereignty over this plant.
Well, let's continue to talk about the consequences of this war and talk about Europe's energy woes, because Ukraine is now offering to help European countries store gas in an effort to help them get through the winter. First of all, here's President Zelensky, who accuses Russia of using energy as a weapon.
Russia uses economic terror, pressures with price crises and poverty to weaken Europe just when it needs its full strength to defend against the terror of the war Russia has been conducting.
While the European Union, just like the UK, is seeing soaring energy prices, in part as it reduces its reliance on Russian gas, in part because there are concerns that Russia could deliberately tighten the taps. And of all the EU countries, Germany relies most on Russian energy. Before the war in Ukraine, more than 50% of Germany's gas came from Russia. This has now dropped to 35%. In Germany, electricity prices are soaring. At the start of the war, electricity in Germany was trading at 156 euros per megawatt hour. This morning it went past 1,000 euros for the first time. It has since stabilised after Germany said it was ahead of its target for storing gas for the winter. While the European Union is now saying an emergency intervention is needed to try and rein in energy prices, let's hear from Ursula von der Leyen.
It is no more fit for purpose. And that's why we, the Commission, are now working on an emergency intervention and a structural reform of the electricity market.
But what could that structural reform look like? Belgium's energy minister says gas prices should be frozen and no longer used to dictate the price of electricity. Other member states have been pushing for a temporary gas on wholesale gas prices. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is calling for a European-wide solution.
We have to become independent of fossil fuels from Russia. The current rising energy prices are a big burden for households, for consumers and for our businesses. That's why it's our priority. We'll do everything to be able to tackle this challenge with targeted help to our citizens, our households and consumers.